In this unit, we're going to discuss Active Directory certificate services, which is mostly a supporting role for Active Directory. So far in this course, we talked mostly about Active Directory, and we're going to continue with that theme here in this unit, in Unit 4. And certificate services, basically certificate services are required because certificate services are what allows trust, and it allows us to authenticate users and computers and so forth. It's that underlying infrastructure. And PKI, which we're going to talk about first, so PKI, or the Public Key Infrastructure System, it's a mechanism for doing encryption and trust that utilizes both private, both synchronous and asynchronous encryption, as well as private and public, as well as synchronous keys. And we use all of those things to ensure the integrity, confidentiality, of messages, which you can imagine is fairly important for authentication and authorization, which we use in Active Directory. So in most organizations, you will need, when you're running Active Directory, you're going to need a server to fill this role, or several servers to fill this role for certificate services in order for everything to work correctly. So let's get started and talk about Active Directory certificate services. So it is a server role in Windows Server 2012 R2, and it provides the services for creating the PKI, or the public key infrastructure. So it adds a level of security for a variety of applications. So it's for VPNs, for EFS, smart cards, SSL, TLS. Any of these services are going to require a certificate service. So the public key infrastructure is a secure system that binds the user's or device's identity to a cryptographic key. So it provides confidentiality, integrity, non-repudiation, and authentication. And you can imagine authentication is pretty important with Active Directory, so that goes without saying. I think confidentiality and integrity are fairly well known to most people. But non-repudiation is basically not being able to deny that you sent a message or that you did something. So it ensures that you are who you say you are. That's basically what non-repudiation is for. So PKI allows us to do all of these things. Without adequate security, communications can be tampered with, causing websites to be redirected to unwanted or other unwanted behaviors. So you can imagine it's fairly important. So here is a list of the components that make up the public key infrastructure. Plain text is an unencrypted message. Ciphertext is after a message has been encrypted. Then you have keys. There are two different types of keys. Well, three really types of keys. There's a synchronous key, which we usually just call a key. This is when you have encryption where the encryption algorithm utilizes the same key for both encrypting and unencrypting the data. A secret and private key. So basically, a private key is a key that you use to decrypt a message, as is a secret key, but you cannot use that to encrypt the message. And likewise, a public key is used to encrypt a message, but cannot be used to unencrypt a message. So it's asynchronous, meaning that there's two different types of keys. So symmetric cryptography is when we have one key, which I talked about first, whereas asymmetric cryptography is when we have two different keys. A digital certificate is how we authenticate, or how we basically how we certify that someone is who they say they are. Usually a digital certificate is a way of providing authorization or authentication that is ensured by a third party. So for example, if you have a driver's license, when when somebody asks who you are, the authorities, let's say you go to the airport and you're going to get on an airplane, the TSA, you can't just tell them that your name is John Doe. You have to prove it. And you prove it by showing your driver's license. And they trust your driver's license because they trust the DMV that issued the driver's license. There are features in that driver's license that they can look for to authenticate that it is a real driver's license and that it can be trusted. And likewise, there are some municipalities and some governments where the TSA does not trust that security. For example, the state of Pennsylvania, I believe at the time I'm recording this, the state of Pennsylvania's driver's licenses will no longer be accepted by TSA because they don't trust it anymore. So that's kind of what a digital certificate does for us. And a digital signature, in the same vein, a digital signature is how you can sign a message to ensure that you know who it came from. And a certificate authority is who is issuing those certificates, those digital certificates, which is basically what we're doing when we install certificate services in Active Directory. We're making our whatever server we're installing that role, we're turning that into a certificate authority for our local area network or for our enterprise network. So basically, with PKI, what basically happens is and this is just an example with a client and a server. A client like, for example, using Chrome or Microsoft Internet Explorer or Edge, requesting a web page from a web server. It's going to request a secure transaction, such as when you use HTTPS in the URL. The server sends back a certificate. The certificate is verified, and they will also send an encryption session key, and then the data can be transferred securely from the web server to the client, and vice versa. So that's roughly how the handshake works with PKI. And again, this is used pretty extensively. I think all of us use it every day, whether you realize it or not. So some of the terms that are related to PKI and to Active Directory certificate services is a certificate revocation list, or CRL, certificate template, certificate distribution point, or CDP, Delta CRL, enterprise certificate authority, standalone certificate authority, and enrollment agent, and also CA hierarchy and online responder. And then you have a certificate enrollment, key management, and authority information access, or AIA. So we're going to talk about some of these terms as we go through these slides. Throughout the rest of this unit, we'll talk about some of these terms. In the next slide deck, we're going to talk about how to deploy certificate role, and then finally I'm going to talk about how to configure certificate authority on your server. So we'll come back to a lot of these terms as we go through that.